just a couple days ago, I stumbled upon a commission painting I did years ago when I first started accepting pet portrait commissions. Here it is. Nowadays, I've not only tried to make my pet portraits look more realistic, but also feel and appear more playful, joyful, and cheerful in color. Now, it's one thing to paint pet portraits, but it's another thing to teach it for years. So I've learned so much of what not to do and so much of what to do and focus on. So I've created 7 main things in this mini course that you can focus on even as a beginner, guys, to make your portraits look playfully realistic and colorfully abstract. And all that I cover within this mini course is in a download linked in the description. Now, before we dive in, guess what? Part of the reason why I've been a little hidden, kind of under the radar for the last month, is because the online animal art masterclass that I teach is no more. It's better. It's now the Pet Portrait Masterclass. The heart of the masterclass is still the same, helping creatives master technique while reducing stress, anxiety, depression, but now it's only pets, and I'm gonna focus more on realism and color. So as of right now, this course is officially open, it's ready, and all registered masterclass students from the online Animal Art Masterclass get all this new monthly content. I have a link to this new and improved masterclass in the description, but now guys, without further ado, let's dive into this mini course. Let's begin with color value. I'll be explaining this using Finn the Golden Setter, which, by the way, the drawing and painting tutorial is in my new and improved Pet Portrait Masterclass. What heavily guides my decisions on how I blend, mix, and place color is based on value, not so much on color and how I'm trying to match it to the reference photo. Now, to really help you understand value, value is a property of color. It's where a color sits on the scale of lightness and darkness. And what's really helped me and how I teach this is I've separated these values into dark, medium, and light. When you're using a strong reference photo like this one of Finn, you can pretty easily identify the darkest areas in the photo. And to an untrained eye, you can also likely see the lightest areas where that light is hitting Finn the strongest. Now here's the tricky part that comes with some training, and that's the medium values. These are those in-between values. I call them the joiner values because they create peace and unity between the very darks and the very lights. They give them that hug because they're slightly overlapping both. But have you noticed what all 3 of these values have in common? They all create a unique shape on the dog. So when you're painting your dog portrait, how you want to execute this is ask yourself, is this a dark value? Or is this a light value? Or is this somewhere in between? Once you determine its approximate value, then you can use any color. Just be sure to test it out when in doubt to see how the colors look, and if it's the right value, always test it out. And if I see it's too dark, I just simply mix in more white or a lighter color like the yellow or a light pink. And if the color I tested out was too light, I can simply add more of a darker, more dominant color. And I promise the more you practice this, the more you'll start noticing those slight value changes. Then I apply and layer it by its shape that it's forming. And how we layer those shapely values is dark, then to medium, then to light. I prefer nowadays to work in one area at a time. I used to jump around and find all the dark values first, then all the medium values, then the light. That is a method, a more abstract method, but to make my portraits look more realistic, a strategy that really helps me maintain proportions, which is so important in realism, is by working at one body part at a time, like I'm doing here. I like to begin mixing up my core colors. This is my dark and my medium and my light. Do you notice how I have those colors mixed up on my paint palette that I'm pulling from and applying a flat layer to the dog nose? Now, sorry to interrupt, but I've partnered with 4 Paws bracelets. With all these displaced pets, shelters are overflowing. So 4 Paws bracelets are sending funds to charities that provide meals for these animal shelters. So the next 4 people that order from my shop get one of these bracelets that feeds 10 dogs or 5 cats. That means the next 4 people to order a fine art print, card pack, bag, puzzle, or notebook also gets a beautiful stone bracelet included with their order. I love this charity because they're not only feeding animals, but this lowers euthanasia rates and allows shelters to put more funds towards medical care. You can find a link to that charity and my Etsy shop down below. Let's get back to it. So you learned we move from dark to light, but we also move from smooth to textured. This is actually what I apply to my drawing first and how I apply my paint. So what I mean by that is we want to focus on covering up the white, applying a more blended, flat layer, adding only 1 to 2 layers for our base layer, then over top that, very slowly layering a range of values and textures. I'm not trying to make it perfectly smooth and blended, but while I'm covering up the white of my paper or canvas, I'm laying down that foundation to help me and guide me for those top values. And that leads me to not going too light too soon. If I were to paint this flat base layer too light, adding the texture, because we go from smooth to more textured, that's lighter, it wouldn't show up. It just wouldn't show up. And I'm not even adding straight white here. I'm adding a light blue. I know it's tricky to gauge this, especially as a beginner. That's what comes with practice. But lucky for us, working with acrylic paint, acrylic dries darker than what we're seeing when it's wet. The value gets just slightly darker. So don't abuse that and go too light. Always shy more on the dark side. But doing this creates such a beautiful, dynamic range of values from dark to medium to light, creating the form we want that helps it to look realistic. Next is large to small. Those final details are usually those small, tiny little dots or tiny little lines. The goal is to build up layers until we get to those final top, tiny little layers. Something I call stacking, where the top layers aren't entirely covering up the bottom layers, but partially. So as we build up layers, size and the shape really matters. But what about the very beginning, like right here where I'm just trying to cover up the white? Am I doing a lot of stacking or am I doing blending? My answer to that is both. I'm working one area at a time, mostly blending my darks, fading into the medium value, stacking those light values over top the medium values of smaller size, but again, at this stage, not my lightest values. We want to go darker rather than too light too soon. So over time, once the white is covered up, I'm doing mostly stacking. And once you've covered up the white of your canvas or paper and you have that first 1 or 2 layers down, this is where you really focus on the shape that these values are creating. This is where you ask yourself, is this dark value or medium value or light value creating more of a line or a square or a circle or a long weird looking triangle? This stage is where that really matters. And getting the correct shape is not only important in creating form, it's also very important in maintaining the correct proportions. That leads me to my next point. You want to revisit values, especially those dark and medium values. As you're adding all these different layers, it's very easy to go over your proportion lines or just the lines of your sketch that maintain the proportions of the animal. So it's so important as you're stacking those values, adding layer after layer, that you pause and go back to those dark and medium values and even maybe reduce some of those values so that you keep maintaining the nose, the proportions of the eyes, the ears. Always step back to make sure the eyes are symmetrical, the nose sits in the center of the face, one leg or paw isn't bigger than the other, etc. So yes, I'm saying to keep your colors damp as best you can. I know acrylics does dry fast. This is actually why in my class I often recommend students have a spray bottle, or in between painting sessions, they cover their paint palette with saran wrap or aluminum foil. That's what I prefer. This will keep paints damp for up to 3 days. And that leads me to the last and final point, which is to leave the refining of your smallest lines, dots, your smallest shapes at the end. This is where you're using your smallest brushes, detail brushes, those liner, those rigger, those spot brushes to get in those final whiskers, those final little tiny peach hairs, the final highlights over the eyes, and cleaning up all those straight or long or curly or wavy fur strands that cut into the background or layer over top other body parts. We're cleaning them up, meaning we're going back with the color around it and overlapping it so that it can just refine those lines. And this also means adding more fine lines that are just small and thin and light in value. All right, creatives, so I know that was a lot, which is why I've added what we've covered today in a download that you can download and keep linked in the description. Now, please, if this mini course has blessed you, be sure to like and subscribe for more pet and wildlife tutorials in acrylics. I hope you have a wonderful Halloween, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye.